He married a homeless woman to win a cruel bet, but on their wedding night, she vanished and left behind a truth that could ruin him forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Chandeliers sparkled like stars above the ballroom, casting a golden glow over the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the space, underscored by the soft murmur of a string quartet. In the heart of the celebration, Nathan Parker stood tall, perfectly polished in his custom-tailored suit, a glass of champagne in hand, his posture radiating superiority. He was the kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to command a room. His wealth did it for him. Nathan's eyes scanned the guests with quiet detachment, the kind of cold amusement reserved for someone used to being at the top. The party was in full swing. Another showcase of his success, another night where he stood until Michael Carter appeared. Michael, an old college friend turned business rival, approached the balcony with a mischievous grin and a glass of wine sloshing slightly in his hand. His eyes glittered with provocation. "Nathan," he said, raising his glass, "you always say money can buy anything. Still believe that?" Nathan didn't turn. "Because it can," he replied coolly, sipping his champagne. Michael leaned over the railing and pointed toward the street below. "Then let's make things interesting." Far beneath the marble-clad mansion, just beyond the security gates, a woman sat, curled against a lamppost. Her clothes were worn and too thin for the chilly night. She looked like a ghost of someone once whole. A cardboard sign rested at her feet, scrawled with the words, "Anything help." Nathan barely glanced at her. "And what? You want me to toss her a coin?" Michael said, his voice gleaming with challenge. "I bet you $2 million that you can't turn her into a proper lady of high society and stay married to her for 3 months. Nathan turned slowly, now fully facing Michael, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "$2 million?" he said, amused. "You think I can't marry a beggar and make her pass as one of them?" Michael shrugged. "Not just marry her, live with her, take her into your world, make people believe she belongs." A silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Nathan's lips curled into a smirk. "You really underestimate me." Michael clinked his glass against Nathan's. "Then prove it." Nathan didn't hesitate. He set down his champagne flute and walked inside, crossing the polished floors with the same confidence that closed billion-dollar deals. Within minutes, he was on the sidewalk outside the estate gates. The air was colder here, and the scent of perfume and expensive wine faded into the damp smell of the city. He stopped just a few feet from the woman. She looked up sharply, her face framed by unwashed hair and eyes too tired for her age, but something in her gaze cut through him, defiant, alert, alive. "Excuse me," he said, his tone more like an order. She narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" He smiled, carefully measured. "I have a proposition for you, one that could change your life." The woman didn't flinch. "I'm not a prop, and I'm not interested." But Nathan wasn't done. "Not even close?" Nathan took a step closer, ignoring her sharp tone. "It's a simple arrangement," he said. 3 months. You come live with me, we get married, legally. You'll have food, clothes, shelter, anything you want. And at the end of it, you walk away with enough money to never need anyone's help again." The woman's expression turned from suspicion to disbelief. "Are you drunk?" He said calmly. "Just rich, and very serious." She stared at him, searching for the punchline, the hidden cruelty. She had seen enough of the world to know that nothing good came without a price. "You want me to marry you, just like that?" Nathan smiled faintly. "You'll be compensated for your time." Her lips pressed into a line. "What's the catch?" "There's a contract. You follow my rules, appear in public with me when needed. Smile, dress well, behave. That's it." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the glowing windows above them, where laughter still floated down like confetti. She looked back at him, her shoulders rising slightly. "Name is Emily," she said quietly. "Not you." Nathan blinked. "Emily?" he repeated. "You have a deal?" She hesitated. Her pride screamed no. Her stomach, empty for days, begged her otherwise. And then she nodded. "I'll do it, but don't expect me to thank you." "I wouldn't dream of it," Nathan replied. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the shelter where Emily had spent the night. A driver opened the door without a word. She stepped in slowly, still unsure if it was all a dream or a trap. She held no luggage, just the clothes on her back and a single notebook tucked under her coat. The drive to Nathan's estate was long, winding through the affluent hills that surrounded the city. Emily looked out the window the whole time, wondering what kind of world she was being pulled into. When the gates opened and the mansion came into view, she drew a sharp breath. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of marble and steel. Cold, perfect, imposing. Nathan met her at the entrance, hands in his pockets, flanked by 2 assistants and a stylist already waiting with fabrics and measuring tape. "Welcome to your new life," he said simply. Emily looked at the towering walls, the polished floors, the waiting servants. She had never felt so small. She turned to him, her voice low. "You don't know anything about me." "I don't need to," he replied. "This isn't about who you were, it's about what you'll become." Emily nodded slowly, her face unreadable. But inside, something clenched. She would play his game, but she would never belong to it. The contract was signed that evening. Nathan's lawyer explained the terms in dry, clinical language. 3 months of marriage, no physical obligations, public appearances required. A strict confidentiality clause. Compensation to be delivered upon successful completion. Emily signed it with steady hands. A private room was prepared for her, far from Nathan's. She stood in front of the mirror that night wearing a soft robe provided by the house staff. For the first time in years, she was clean, warm, and alone. She traced the lines of her face and whispered to her reflection, "You're not doing this for him, you're doing this to survive." But beneath that survival instinct, something else stirred, an ember of defiance, a quiet vow that she wouldn't let this man, or his world, destroy what little she had left of herself. Emily turned away from the mirror, her eyes sharper than ever. The game had begun. The courthouse was bleak, just beige walls, fluorescent lights, and the sterile scent of legal bureaucracy. Emily stood beside Nathan in an ill-fitting beige dress, her palms clammy against the bouquet someone had shoved into her hands at the last minute. Nathan, dressed immaculately in a custom navy suit rather than his own wedding. The ceremony was swift and devoid of sentiment. The judge read out the vows with the warmth of a voicemail, and Nathan recited his lines with a cool detachment. Emily, voice quiet but steady, followed suit. No rings, no kiss, no guests aside from Nathan's lawyer and his driver standing stiffly behind them. When the paperwork was signed, the judge offered a tired smile. "Congratulations," he said with. Emily blinked, unsure if it was sarcasm. Outside the courthouse, a sleek black car waited. Nathan opened the door for her but didn't offer a hand. Emily slid in silently, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest like an invisible hand. The ride was hushed, the air between them heavy. She glanced at him occasionally, hoping for a trace of emotion. Remorse, nervousness, anything. But Nathan stared out the window like the city was more interesting than his brown. When they reached his estate, Emily gasped. The Parker mansion was like something out of a film. White stone, towering pillars, grand staircases, fountains trickling into koi ponds, and hedges carved into perfect symmetry. But despite its splendor, the place felt hollow, almost haunted. A staff of silent, uniformed workers lined up at the entrance, offering polite nods as Nathan stepped out. Emily followed, feeling their eyes scan her from head to toe. She was suddenly self-conscious of her worn-out shoes and chapped lips. Nathan gestured to the housekeeper without even looking her way. "Show her to the guest." Emily paused mid-step. "Guest wing?" she asked, eyebrows raised. Nathan glanced back, unbothered. "You didn't think we'd be sharing a room, did you? This is a contract marriage, not a honeymoon." And just like that, she understood her place. The room she was led to was more luxurious than anything she had known. Soft lions, gold trim, a marble bathroom. But it wasn't hers. It wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage. She sat on the edge of the massive bed and stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. That evening, a formal dinner was arranged in the mansion's vast dining hall. The chandelier overhead sparkled like stars frozen in glass. Emily entered slowly, now in an elegant dress Nathan had ordered for her. She walked the long expanse of the table to the opposite end, where he was already seated. The distance between them felt symbolic. 12 feet of polished wood and unsaid truths. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Because I can. Words hit her like a slap, not because they were shocking, but because they were so expected. Cold, calculated, mechanical. Emily pushed her plate away and stood. Enjoy your dinner. He didn't stop her as she walked out. That night, she stood at the tall windows of her room, staring out at the immaculately lit gardens. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, her mind racing with questions. Was this her life now? A purchased presence? A 3-month performance for a man who didn't even see her as human? And then, the past came rushing back. Years ago, before the streets, before she'd lost everything, she had applied for a job at Parker Enterprises. She had shown up early for the interview, dressed in her mother's old blazer and holding a perfectly prepared resume. She remembered sitting in the waiting room, nervous but hopeful, imagining the possibilities that might follow if she got the job. Then the door opened. A young executive walked in, sharp-sighted, tall, powerful. Nathan Parker. He hadn't even glanced at her name. He flipped through her resume with disinterest, then tossed it on the table like a useless flyer. "We don't waste time on amateurs," he had said flatly, not even looking her in the eyes. Emily had walked out of that building in tears, humiliated. That day had marked the unraveling of everything: job prospects, housing, her confidence. Her life spiraled from there, and now, years later, she was in his house, married to him under a legal farce, and he didn't even remember her face. Memory made her stomach churn. She paced her room, restless. She needed answers. Did he truly not remember, or was this his twisted idea of dominance, to bring her full circle and make her depend on him? Fueled by the ache of the past, she opened the door and walked through the mansion's dim hallway toward the study. She could hear the faint tapping of a keyboard behind the slightly ajar door. Inside, Nathan sat at his desk, sleeves rolled, reviewing documents. He looked up, surprised, sordid. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice tighter than she'd intended. He leaned back slowly. "Go ahead." "Oh, you really not remember me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Nathan frowned, genuinely puzzled. "Should I?" Emily swallowed hard. "A few years ago, interview, Parker Enterprises. You dismissed me, crushed me in 5 seconds like I was nothing." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, "I interview hundreds of people a year. I don't remember all of them." She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp in the silence. "Of course, because people like me are disposable to people like you." And before he could say anything else, she turned and left the room, slamming the door behind her. Back in her room, she curled up on the bed, pulling the sheets to her chin, though the night wasn't cold. She stared into the dark for hours, wide awake, knowing deep in her gut, this wasn't just about money or a bet anymore. It was about power, past wounds, and a man who had broken her once, and might do it again. The next morning, the sun filtered through the tall windows of the east wing, casting soft light across the room where Emily lay wide awake. Sleep had been shallow, fragmented by memories and questions. She stared at the ceiling, still seething over last night's confrontation. Nathan hadn't remembered her, hadn't even flinched when she recalled how he once dismissed her, crushing her confidence in a single sentence. That moment had fractured her future, and to him, it had been nothing at all. That truth settled like lead in her chest. She found him later in the home gym, throwing punches at a padded dummy with mechanical precision. His shirt clung to him, damp from exertion, and a trainer stood to the side, counting off reps. When he noticed her standing in the doorway, Nathan wiped his face with a towel, and dismissed the trainer with a curt nod. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside. "I thought we already did." "You didn't remember me from that interview," she said, her voice sharp with accusation. "And that's the problem. You break people, and you don't even remember doing it." He arched a brow. "I don't go out of my way to ruin lives, Emily. It's business. You knew that when you agreed to this." She crossed her arms. This isn't business. This is theater. You picked me for a bet?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You said yes." Her jaw clenched. "I said yes because I had no choice." Nathan said nothing for a long moment, then finally shrugged. "You're here now. Let's make the most of it." Emily turned on her heel and left, fuming, but somewhere beneath the fury was the sting of powerlessness, and she hated it. The transformation began that afternoon. 3 stylists arrived, armed with fabric samples, makeup kits, and measuring tapes. They treated Emily like a doll, speaking around her, not to her. She was pinned, brushed, buffed, and styled. Her hair was trimmed, her nails reshaped, her skin moisturized and highlighted. Emily submitted to the process with silent defiance. Next came Madame Estelle, an etiquette coach who walked with the posture of royalty and corrected every movement with crisp precision. Fork angles, eye contact, posture, speech cadence. The lessons were endless. Emily endured them, challenged them, and sometimes outright questioned them. "You don't need to teach me how to behave," she said once. Estelle had smiled politely. "No, but I'm teaching you how they expect you to." The words stuck. As the days passed, Emily began to reclaim parts of herself that had gone dormant. The clarity of thought, the ability to command a room, the strength to stand tall without apology. She wasn't becoming someone new, she was returning to someone she used to be, before the world had kicked her down. Nathan noticed. He never said much, but he lingered more, watched longer. His eyes followed her when she entered a room, when she laughed at one of Estelle's sharp jokes, when she challenged the chef over the ingredients in a meal. He wasn't smiling, but something behind his stare was shifting. Then came the test. A formal dinner, unannounced until the day before. Nathan had invited investors, socialites, and journalists. Emily was to appear as his wife, not as a reclusive stranger, but as his equal. The pressure was immense. The staff buzzed around her like bees in a storm. She selected a deep green gown with a low back and a high neckline. Elegant, strong. Her hair was twisted up in a soft chignon. Diamond earrings sparkled beneath her ears. Borrowed, of course. When she entered the ballroom, the conversations paused. Dozens of guests turned to see the woman who had appeared out of nowhere and married Nathan Parker. The scrutiny was palpable. She felt it in every step. Nathan stood near the bar, speaking to a group of men in tailored suits. When he saw her, his eyes lingered for a beat too long. His brow raised slightly. Approval? Surprise? She couldn't tell. But it was the first genuine reaction she had drawn from him. She walked toward him calmly. "You clean up well," he said. She met his gaze. "I didn't do it for you." A flicker of amusement touched his lips, but he said nothing more. Dinner was a glittering affair. 10 courses, candlelight, silver trays, waitstaff dressed in black. Emily sat beside Nathan but spoke little. Instead, she listened. She observed. When someone addressed her directly, she answered with poise. Her voice never wavered. "Mrs. Parker," one guest asked with a smirk. "Which boarding school taught you such charm?" Emily smiled. "The kind where your roommate is cold concrete and your textbooks are eviction notices." The man blinked, unsure how to respond. Nathan said nothing, but his eyes narrowed, his mouth twitching slightly. Not in disapproval, but surprise. Another guest asked if she'd ever traveled abroad. Emily said, "But I've lived on the streets of 5 major U.S. cities. That's a kind of world tour in its own right." There was a murmur around the table. A few guests chuckled. A woman near the end of the table raised her glass slightly in silent respect. Then the sharpest moment arrived. A blunt, older man with too many rings on his fingers and arrogance in his tone leaned forward. "Forgive me, but you're not what I expected from Nathan's wife." The room quieted. Emily set down her fork and said clearly, "I'm not what most people expect, but that says more about them than it does about me." The table fell silent. And then, laughter. Soft at first, then sincere. Someone clapped. Someone else raised a glass. The mood shifted. Emily had done it. She hadn't just survived the evening, she'd owned it. After the guests left, Nathan found her standing in the corridor outside the ballroom. She was barefoot, holding her heels in one hand, the train of her gown swept over one arm. "You impressed them," he said. She didn't turn around. "I wasn't trying to." He stepped beside her. "You've changed," she said. "I just stopped hiding." He looked at her differently then, less like a pawn, more like a puzzle. Something complicated, something worth understanding. "Estimated you," he admitted. She finally turned to face him. "That's what everyone does. That's how I survive." Their eyes locked. It wasn't affection, not yet. But the air between them had changed. The bet, the contract, the distance, all of it seemed to hang suspended in that moment. Nathan saw her. And for the first time, she didn't mind being seen. The study wasn't a place Emily usually ventured. It was Nathan's sanctuary, a space filled with sleek furniture, glass trophies, books he probably never read, and the cold scent of expensive wood polish. But that afternoon, something pulled her inside. She had been looking for a distraction, maybe a novel, something to stop her from thinking too much. She didn't expect to find her heart broken all over again. A stack of loose papers sat in the center of Nathan's desk, freshly printed, unguarded. She might have ignored them if not for the bold subject lines stamped across the top page. A status update. Her stomach sank. She picked up the first page with hesitant fingers. "Michael Carter, can't believe you actually did it. You're 2 weeks in, still think you'll make it through the full 3 months with the stray?" Nathan's reply, easier than expected. "She cleans up well. Still a bit of a project, but I've got it under control." Her fingers trembled. She read further. "Elect my $2 million, 0 cents soon enough." It's not like she's anything special. The blood drained from Emily's face. The floor under her felt like it was falling away. Every page confirmed it wasn't just a hunch or a suspicion or a moment of cruelty. It was a game, a challenge, a joke, and she was the punchline. The door creaked behind her. Nathan stepped in, stopping in his tracks when he saw her holding the papers. "Emily," he said quickly, "I can it really shouldn't." Her voice came out hollow. She dropped the pages. They scattered across the polished floor like shattered glass. "I gave you a second chance," she said. "I gave you space in my life, in my heart, and you—" Her voice cracked. "And you never saw me as anything more than some project to win money with." His expression faltered. "It started that way. But it's not what it is now." "So now I'm supposed to believe you've had a change of heart?" she snapped, rage surging into her chest. "That you've been playing savior because you care? Spare me, Nathan. You've been reporting to your friend like I'm a science It's not fair," he muttered. "What's not fair is being tricked into thinking this marriage meant something. What's not fair is how I let my guard down for a man who never once stopped playing a game." He took a step toward her, but she stepped back. "You don't get to spin this," she said. "You don't get to turn this into a redemption story." And with that, she turned and walked out, heart thudding, eyes burning, steps unsteady but determined. That night, when the house was quiet and the staff retired, Emily packed a small canvas bag, just essentials. She slipped on old sneakers instead of heels and opened the window to her bedroom. The trellis outside offered an easy climb. She didn't look back as she descended into the dark. The city felt different now, not loud or cruel, but indifferent, the kind of indifferent she understood. She walked for blocks without aim, the sound of her footsteps echoing against cold concrete. Her legs ached, her throat felt dry, and her hands shook from the cold. She passed the same streetlight twice before realizing she was walking in circles. Eventually, she found an old subway station, Lexington Line. It was the same one she'd slept near on her hardest nights years ago. She sat on the cement steps, her body folding inward from exhaustion. Her head swam. The tears came silently, not from sadness alone, but from the bitter realization that history had repeated itself. And this time, she had let it. The last thing she remembered was her vision blurring as the cold wrapped around her body. Back at the mansion, Nathan hadn't slept. He paced the hallway outside her room, glancing again and again at the open window and the swaying curtains. Security had no leads. Her phone was off, and for the first time, he didn't care about optics or damage control. He was afraid. She was gone. She had vanished from his world, and unlike before, when he dismissed people easily, her absence burned. He got in the car himself and started driving. Something in him, some instinct, guided him toward the places she had once described. Shelters, stations, side streets. He remembered a story she told during one of their early dinners about sleeping near the old Lexington station on nights when she had nowhere else to go. It was a long shot, but he had to try. He pulled up beside the subway entrance just as the street lamps flickered overhead. He jogged down the concrete stairs and stopped cold. There she was, slumped against the wall, legs folded awkwardly beneath her, pale and unmoving. A plastic bag hung from her wrist, her knuckles scraped raw from the climb. "Emily," he rushed to her side. Her eyes fluttered weakly, then closed again. He lifted her in his arms, she was lighter than she should have been, and carried her up to the car. "Hospital now," he barked to the driver, who swerved into gear without hesitation. At the hospital, chaos blurred into stillness. Nurses checked vitals, IVs were connected, and doctors spoke in clipped tones. "Malnourished," one said. "Dehydrated," another added. "Severe physical..." Nathan sat in the corner of the sterile room, staring at her sleeping face. She looked so small in the hospital bed, tubes snaking into her arms, her lips chapped and pale. She didn't stir. The beep of the monitor was the only thing keeping him grounded. He stayed the entire night. At one point, a nurse came in and asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. No food, no rest, nothing mattered except that she opened her eyes again. He remembered the way she had challenged him at dinner parties, the way she had looked in that emerald gown, the way her voice had shaken when she told him he broke her. She had every right to leave. And yet here he was, more than anything, that she'd come back, not to the mansion, but to him. By morning, he was still at her side, holding her hand. And for once, the man who had always controlled everything had no idea what would happen next. The first thing Emily saw when she opened her eyes was the soft glow of a bedside monitor. The steady beep confirmed she was alive. Her limbs felt heavy, her throat dry, and every breath burned faintly in her chest. It took her a moment to remember where she was and why. Then she heard his voice. "You're awake." Nathan sat slouched in a chair near the bed, his eyes bloodshot, a crumpled blazer on the armrest beside him. He looked exhausted, utterly unlike the polished man she was used to. For once, his walls were down. Emily blinked slowly. She didn't speak. "I know, I'm the last person you want to see," he said softly. "But I need to say this while you're here. While you can hear me." She turned her head slightly toward him, but her expression remained blank. "The bet was real," he admitted. "Every word in those emails. I don't expect forgiveness for that. I wouldn't forgive me either." He paused, swallowing hard. "But what started as a game, it stopped being one. I didn't realize how much until I thought I'd lost you." Still, she said nothing. Her face was unreadable, her body too weak to react. "I gave Michael the money," he continued, "all of it, but I told him to keep it. Then I gave the same amount to a shelter, one of the ones you mentioned in passing. It's not enough, but it's a start." Emily closed her eyes for a long moment, not to sleep, but to escape. Nathan didn't move. "We canceled a few deals last week too, ones that would have pushed out housing projects in low empty neighborhoods. Projects I used to call efficient." He let out a bitter breath. They were efficient for me, not for the people living there. She opened her eyes again. Her gaze was softer this time, but distant. Not asking for anything, he added. I just wanted you to know. The next few days passed quietly. Emily remained in the hospital for observation, gaining strength bit by bit. She didn't say much to Nathan, but she allowed him to sit beside her. Sometimes he read aloud from a book. Sometimes he just sat in silence. One morning, he arrived with a sketch pad and a set of pencils. Found these in the guest house, he said. Some of your sketches, they were beautiful. Emily looked at the sketch pad, unsure whether to accept it. She finally reached out and took it from his hand. Huh, cool, he said, smiling at her slowly. You still drew? She rasped. Nathan hesitated. Would you want to again? She didn't respond, but the way her fingers brushed the paper said enough. When she was discharged, Nathan didn't bring her back to the main estate. Instead, he brought her to a private villa on the property. Smaller, warmer, more human. The staff stayed away unless called. There were no reporters, no pretense. And there, in a sunlit corner of the villa, he had created something new. A room filled with light, canvases, oils, watercolors, a proper art studio. She stood in the doorway and stared at it. It's yours, Nathan said from behind her. No cameras, no expectations, just you. Emily stepped inside, her breath catching. She touched a brush with trembling fingers. She didn't thank him, not with words, but she stayed in that room for hours. By evening, the first streaks of paint colored the canvas. The days moved slowly, but something inside Emily began to thaw. She kept to herself mostly, painting in silence. Sometimes she would catch Nathan watching her from a distance, never intruding, just observing with a quiet respect that hadn't existed before. He brought her tea in the afternoons and left it on the studio's windowsill without a word. He no longer tried to explain himself, or impress her, or fix anything. He simply showed up. One morning, he asked her to come with him to visit a local women's shelter where he had started donating anonymously. Emily hesitated. She hadn't been inside a shelter since her lowest point. The memories were raw, but something in Nathan's eyes, humble, almost uncertain, made her agree. The shelter was modest, with peeling paint and the scent of overcooked stew wafting from the kitchen. But it pulsed with life. Women moved between rooms, some holding babies, others talking in soft, tired voices. Volunteers bustled around with quiet urgency. When they arrived, no one recognized Nathan Parker, billionaire CEO. No one cared, and Nathan didn't act like he expected them to. Emily watched him as he knelt down to help an elderly woman repack her bag after it split. He listened patiently when a teen mother vented about her housing voucher delays. He didn't flinch when a woman snapped at him for getting in the way. He just smiled and stepped aside. Later, they sat in the common area drinking lukewarm coffee from paper cups. I used to think I understood poverty, Nathan said. The statistics, the reports. But this is different. Emily didn't reply. She looked out the window, lost in her own thoughts. My word again? Not because of guilt, but because I need to. She turned to him, her voice soft. Guilt is a start, but it can't be the reason forever. He nodded slowly. I know. On the drive back, the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was thoughtful. When they returned to the villa, Nathan walked her to the door but didn't follow her inside. Instead, he stopped. I've hurt a lot of people, he said, but you're the only one who made me feel it. Emily looked at him for a long moment. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I wouldn't believe you if you did, he replied. But she didn't close the door. Over the following weeks, the distance between them narrowed. They spoke more, walked the grounds together, laughed once or twice over nothing important. Emily began leaving her studio door open. Nathan started sharing details of his restructuring efforts, plans to cut ties with exploitative partners, to reinvest programs who only cared about dividends. It wasn't redemption, it was a beginning. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the fields, Emily joined Nathan in the garden. They sat side by side, not speaking, not needing to. After a long pause, she said, "You still have a lot to prove." "I will," he promised. Her eyes met his. The launch of the community center came with little fanfare, just the way Emily preferred it. No cameras, no headlines, no staged ribbon cutting. Just a worn-out building on the east side of the city being transformed, piece by piece, into something full of life. Nathan funded it quietly, pulling from the same money that had once built vacation homes and penthouses. Now, that money paid for art supplies, basketball courts, tutoring programs, and after-school meals. He never asked for his name on the building. He never demanded credit. The plaque by the door simply read, "For those who were forgotten but never unworthy." Emily and Nathan worked together every day. She oversaw the creative programs and outreach while he handled logistics, zoning, and budget approvals. They were equals, partners in a cause greater than either of them had ever embraced before. Their dynamic shifted gradually. It began with shared morning coffees before the kids arrived. Then came laughter in the kitchen while unpacking food donations, stories exchanged during long walks through the neighborhood. The tension that once filled the space between them had softened, replaced by a mutual understanding that didn't require words. One afternoon, as they painted a mural on the west wall of the center, a cascade of colors forming silhouettes of rising figures, Emily paused to stretch her back. Her fingers were stained with blue and gold, a streak of green across her cheek. Nathan looked over and smiled. "You've got paint everywhere." "Good, that means it's working." He reached over and gently wiped her cheek with his sleeve. She didn't pull away. That night, they sat on the steps of the center, watching the last of the kids get picked up by parents or older siblings. The sun dipped low behind the skyline, casting warm amber light across the courtyard. "Do you ever think about what it would be like?" Emily asked softly. "If we'd met like this? Without the lies, without the contract." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Every day." She glanced at him, then back at the sky. "You were never invisible to me, Emily," he added. "Not really. I just wasn't ready to see what was right in front of me." She didn't answer, but her expression softened. A few days later, Emily ran into someone she hadn't seen in years. His name was Leo, a former street performer who once shared corners with her during the worst winters. They bumped into each other outside the shelter, and he did a double take when he saw her. "Emily Clark?" he asked, amazed. She laughed. "Leo? You're still alive?" "Big," he joked, but his grin was real. "I heard rumors you were doing something big, but I didn't believe it." Emily smiled. "It's not just me." "No, but you gave people hope," he said. "You're the proof that it can change. You became someone." The words sat with her long after Leo left. She didn't tell Nathan about the encounter, at least not right away. Some moments were just for her. But he gave her one of his own that week. It was late one evening when Nathan finally opened up. The lights in the community center had been turned off for the night, and the only glow came from the garden lanterns outside. Emily sat on the back porch, sketching in her notebook, as the last summer breeze carried the scent of lavender through the air. Nathan joined her quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, then sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Father was a man who spoke in orders," he said after a long pause. "My mother, she didn't speak at all." Emily looked at him, surprised by the sudden shift. "I grew up in a house filled with silence and ambition," Nathan continued. "Success was the only acceptable emotion. Kindness was a weakness. Failure didn't exist. You either dominated or disappeared." Emily closed her sketchbook and set it aside. "No wonder you built walls so high," she said gently. "I didn't know there was another way to live," he admitted. "Until you." Her breath caught for a moment, but she stayed quiet, letting him speak. "I remember being 7 and getting yelled at for giving a toy to a kid at school who didn't have one," Nathan said, his voice lower now. "My dad made me take it back, said generosity was a liability. Heartbreaking. He nodded slowly. It messed me up. I started believing people were only worth what they could give me. That vulnerability was a trap. Emily leaned back in her chair. I think a lot of people learn the wrong lessons early on. There was another silence, more comfortable this time. Then she spoke. Do you remember a job interview? Years ago, Parker Enterprises. A girl with holes in her shoes who spilled coffee on her resume. Nathan's brow furrowed as he tried to recall. It was me, Emily said. You didn't even look at me, just laughed and said I wasn't the right fit for a company that polished. His face fell. Emily, as you shattered what little confidence I had left that day, she said, her voice calm but steady. I remember walking out and telling myself I'd never be good enough for anyone. Nathan stared at her, guilt etched deep across his features. I am so sorry. I didn't remember, but that doesn't make it okay. To do this, doesn't, she agreed. But the fact that you mean it now matters more than I expected. He reached out, slowly, unsure if it was okay. She didn't move away, but she didn't meet him halfway either. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself. Don't rush this, she said softly. I won't, he promised. They sat like that until the sky turned indigo and the sounds of the city softened into distant echoes. No kisses, no lingering touches, just two people sitting side by side, finally seeing each other without the weight of who they had been. Their emotional intimacy had grown. Trust, cautious but real, was beginning to replace the pain. Later that night, as Emily stood alone in the studio, brushing color onto canvas, she glanced at the door and saw Nathan watching her, not as a man waiting for something, but simply admiring her piece. She gave a small nod, and he left quietly. The cracks in the wall were real now. Nathan pulled the Jeep into a gravel driveway framed by pine trees and silence. The mountain air was crisp, the cabin modest, wooden, weathered, and tucked against a backdrop of snow-dusted hills. No staff waited with trays. No one opened the door. It was just them. Emily stepped out slowly, looking around. Her breath formed soft clouds as she took in the view. The quiet lake below, the footpath weaving between the trees, the unspoiled stillness of it all. This was my mother's favorite place, Nathan said, grabbing the bags from the back. We used to come here when I was a kid, before everything got complicated. I didn't think you had memories like this, Emily said, surprised. Weird. I don't. Not many. That's why I wanted to make new ones here. Inside, the cabin was simple. A small fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen that needed manual effort. Nathan burned the first batch of firewood and spilled flour all over the counter trying to make pancakes. Emily laughed harder than she had in months. They spent their days hiking, cooking, cleaning side by side, doing things once paid others to do. He fumbled through laundry, struggled with chopping vegetables, and discovered that grocery shopping without an assistant was an adventure in itself. But he never complained. Emily found herself letting go. She wore flannel and no makeup, sketched by the lake, read paperbacks in the sun. The silence was healing, not awkward. They sat close by the fire at night, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his school days, how he had been brilliant but hollow. She told him about the cold winters in shelters, the jobs she almost got, and the ones that left her feeling invisible. There was no rushing, no expectation. One evening, while sitting on the dock with their toes grazing the cold water, Nathan turned to her. I love you, Emily. She froze. He didn't look away. Not because I want to bet, not because I've changed. I love you for the way you see people, for how you made me see myself. I don't want to go back to who I was. Emily stared at the water, heart pounding. The wind picked up slightly, stirring her hair. She didn't answer. Not yet. Back in the cabin, she said little. She lay awake that night, staring at the wooden ceiling, wondering whether she could truly trust him with the rest of her life. When they returned to the mansion a week later, everything was quieter than before. No reporters, no parties, just the two of them, stepping into a place that had once been built on control, but now felt like something new. Nathan led her into his study and handed her a folder. "What's this?" "Proof," he said. She opened it to find legal documents, signed, notarized. The original marriage agreement had been dissolved. The bet had been nullified, with all remaining funds redirected to the shelter. And perhaps most shocking of all, his ties with Michael Carter had been severed. Emails, memos, and final termination letters, all there. Emily sat down slowly. "You didn't have to show me this." "You did," he replied. "I don't want you to love me because you've forgiven me. I want you to love me because I've become someone who deserves it." She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, she saw a man who wasn't playing a role, but simply trying to be worthy. Emily tucked the folder away and stood by the window, watching the garden swaying gently in the breeze. Spring was in full bloom. The roses had opened, wild and untrimmed, cascading along the trellises like they'd waited for someone to notice their beauty. Nathan didn't speak. He just watched her, heart lodged in his throat. "You've changed," she said softly, not turning around. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not the woman you married for a bet anymore, and you're not the man who made it. But what we build from here, it has to be real. No contracts, no obligations, no expectations." He stepped forward slowly, the weight of her words anchoring him to the ground. "It is real, and I'll wait as long as you need." Emily turned to face him, eyes calm but searching. "You keep showing up. That's what matters." A week later, on a warm Sunday morning, they walked through the garden together. Nathan had arranged for no meetings, no business calls, just the two of them wandering the grounds like ordinary people with no agenda. They stopped at the old stone fountain, cracked at the base, water trickling unevenly. Emily ran her fingers across the moss-covered edge. "The fountain was the first thing my parents added to the estate," Nathan said. "Back when this place still felt like home." "It still can," Emily replied. He looked at her then, with a kind of reverence he didn't fully understand until that moment. She wasn't just the woman he loved, she was the compass that had led him back to the man he should have been all along. He dropped to one knee. Not with pomp or performance. No diamonds, no crowd. Just him, holding a small, simple ring nestled in a velvet box. "I know I've asked you before, but that time it was business. This time, it's everything but. Emily Clark, will you marry me? Because you want to, not because anyone's watching." She stared at him, the breeze lifting her hair, sunlight catching the quiet shimmer in her eyes. And she smiled. Not the guarded one he'd known in the beginning, but the full, open smile of a woman who had reclaimed her power and chosen love anyway. He slipped the ring onto her finger, stood up, and wrapped his arms around her. They stood in the garden, two flawed souls trying to get it right. No bet, no lies. Just love. The garden had never looked more alive. Light spilled through the canopy of blooming cherry blossoms, and soft instrumental music floated on the warm spring air. It was an intimate wedding, no media, no sponsors, no spectacle. Just the people who mattered. Charity partners, a few old friends, and those whose lives had quietly been transformed by Emily and Nathan's journey sat under white linen tents, watching something remarkable unfold. Emily stood at the top of the garden path, wearing a flowing, ivory dress without glitter or shine, only soft silk that moved like poetry in the breeze. Her hair was swept into a loose bun, wild curls framing her face, and her hands trembled slightly as she held a small bouquet of hand-picked lavender and garden roses. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, but because she was finally at peace. Nathan waited by the altar, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his eyes never leaving her. The man who had once wagered $2 million on turning a homeless woman into a bride now stood in front of her as someone entirely different, gentler, humbled, and in awe of the very woman he had once underestimated. Their vows were simple, whispered from the heart. Nathan's voice cracked. "I promise to choose you every day, not out of habit or convenience, but because my soul knows it is home with you." Emily looked into his eyes, her words quiet but strong. "I promise to walk beside you, to challenge you, and to believe in the man with your whole heart. There were no flower girls, no choreographed performances, just applause, honest, emotional applause. A small orchestra played as they shared their first kiss, as husband and wife, and the moment wrapped around them like a second vow, one unspoken but deeply understood. Afterward, they didn't rush off to a honeymoon in the Maldives or Paris. Instead, they stayed home. The mansion had begun to change. Walls once covered in cold, expensive art now displayed Emily's paintings, bold, layered, vulnerable. The colors told a story that words never could. Some pieces were her own, others were from young artists supported by the Parker Foundation's outreach. She'd become co-founder shortly after their engagement. The foundation, once a front for tax breaks and vanity events, was now a genuine force for change. Under Emily's leadership and Nathan's funding, they opened shelters, educational centers, and startup incubators for marginalized women. Instead of fancy galas, they hosted art exhibits in underserved neighborhoods and hosted job fairs, and they did it together. Late one evening, while preparing documents for a grant proposal, Emily pressed her hand against her lower stomach. It wasn't pain, more like a flutter, a gentle shift inside her that made her pause. Nathan walked into the room holding 2 mugs of herbal tea. He set hers down, noticed the look on her face. "Tia?" She hesitated, then smiled. I think I might be pregnant." He blinked. "Are you sure?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but I feel it." Nathan didn't speak. He just reached for her hand and held it as they sat in silence, imagining what life could become. A few days later, it was confirmed. Emily was indeed pregnant, and when the doctor told them, Nathan wept. Not out of fear or anxiety, but out of awe. He had lost himself in the cold pursuit of power once, and now he was watching his legacy take root, not in balance sheets, but in a tiny heartbeat growing inside the woman he loved. Preparations began. Nathan took over a guest wing of the mansion, determined to build the nursery himself. He spent weeks sanding wood, assembling furniture, and painting murals on the walls. Emily would find him there late at night, humming softly as he painted the outline of a tree with small woodland animals. It wasn't perfect, but it was his hands, his care, his transformation. The months passed. Emily continued to paint, even as her belly grew. She taught art workshops to young mothers at the shelter, her laughter often echoing louder than the children. Nathan joined her sometimes, silently setting up chairs or carrying boxes, always watching her with reverence. His arrogance had long since faded, replaced by a quiet confidence rooted in something deeper: love and service. When their daughter was born, a crisp winter morning after a long night of labor, she arrived with a cry so fierce that it made both of them laugh and cry at once. They named her Hope. Hope had Emily's piercing eyes and Nathan's dimpled chin. She clung to Nathan's finger moments after being placed in his arms, and he swore to her then that he would never let go. Not of her, not of the life they'd built, not of the man he had become to deserve this. Life after Hope was beautifully chaotic. Bottles on the dining table, diapers stacked beside business proposals, pacifiers mixed in with foundation donor envelopes. But there was rhythm in the chaos, joy in the mess. Every morning, Nathan read to Hope in the nursery while Emily painted just outside the door. Every evening, they took slow walks through the garden, wrapped in blankets, marveling at the stars and how they had aligned just enough to lead them here. Emily continued her work with the foundation, often bringing Hope along. She refused to live behind glass walls or shut herself away in privilege. She wanted their daughter to see the world in its rawness, to understand both pain and possibility. One day, at an art gala they hosted for underprivileged youth, a young girl approached Emily and said, "You make me think I can be something." And me crouched beside her. "You already are." That night, Nathan whispered to Emily in bed, "You didn't just change my life, you gave me one." Their home became a sanctuary, filled with warmth and color, but not just from Emily's art, from the lives they touched, from the values they lived. Friends who once doubted their marriage now sought their advice. Strangers wrote letters about how their story inspired them to believe in redemption, in second chances, in slow, honest love. On a bright spring morning, Emily stood in her sunlit studio, brush in hand. She'd painted freely, the canvas alive with vibrant movement. Nathan stood in the doorway, holding baby Hope in his arms, watching her with a smile that said everything he couldn't put into words. Emily turned, saw him there, and nodded softly. No words were needed. No grand speeches. Just love. Just legacy. Just the beginning. And as the morning light spilled across the floor, one final truth settled in both their hearts. Sometimes, love isn't found. It's built, slowly, painfully, beautifully.